to the Backstage Creative, the podcast that focuses on the people who work behind the scenes of theater. I'm the host and creator of this podcast. My name is Krista Copper. Today is my conversation with Maddy Henry. Maddie is a stage manager and a fellow podcaster, and she's also Canadian, which means she's my first international guest, which is exciting to have at least for me, to have, kind of a milestone for the Backstage Creative. I came across Maddie because I stumbled upon her podcast called Standing By, which I highly encourage anyone to check out. I've been really enjoying listening to her interviews. It was fun to talk to Maddie and hear why she wanted to start a podcast, and it's very similar to the reasons why I wanted to start my podcast. On both of ours, we interview people who work behind the scenes, and we both feel that those people are underrepresented and a lot of times underappreciated. I think a lot of times audiences rarely know or understand all of the people and all of the skills and all of the artistry that goes into creating a live production. And part of that is okay. Like, it's our job to create, a seamless whole picture for them. And so it's fine if that's, just what they see is the whole picture and not all the little pieces. But even within the theater industry, sometimes I wonder, how much better we would be able to do our jobs if we just had more of an understanding of what everyone else was trying to do. For example, as a musician during Tech Week, it can get kind of long and frustrating and draining to be sitting in the pit for an hour, maybe two, without doing anything. But sometimes that's because the lighting designer is working through what they need to do, because during Tech Week, that's when the lighting designer does the majority of their work. And so if I didn't know that, then it would be easy to be frustrated, like, this is a waste of time, why am I down here? But the more you understand what everyone else is doing, and the more you can respect their process and meet them with language from their corner of the theater world, the more enjoyable I think doing your job can be, and the better relationships you can create with the people you work with, and the more fun it can be. It should be fun to be a part of a show and to do that very important work. So yeah, that was a long-winded explanation, but I think Maddie and I both share the desire to kind of draw back the curtain a little bit and highlight the people who do all of the jobs that make the magic, and support the actors, and make the music come alive, and make the story come alive. If you have liked the Backstage Creative on Facebook or have left a rating or review on iTunes, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Also, be sure to check out Maddy Henry's podcast, Standing By. Maddie and I start this interview right off the bat by talking about her podcast, Standing By. With a lot of these interviews, I don't really have like a set beginning. I just kind of get on the call and hit record kind of whenever. And so that's what happened here, is I hit record kind of in the middle of a conversation we had already started. So this interview will just jump right into talking about her podcast. So here we go. Here's my conversation with Canadian stage manager and fellow podcaster Maddy Henry. Yeah, I think it's such a great day and age to have a podcast, because there's so many tools and resources, and I've at least the ones that I've used, I found them fairly easy to use for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're getting more and more straightforward as more people decide that they want to start podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's actually, I find it is pretty straightforward. And I found, especially with GarageBand, if there's anything I have questions on or can't figure out, there's always a YouTube video for it. So
Yeah, thank goodness for people who just sit around and make informative YouTube videos about random programs.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, what would I do without you? Probably nothing.
Yeah. Awesome. So we've already kind of started, I guess. Let's start with your podcast, since we're already talking about that. Talk to us a little bit about that. Like, why you wanted to do a podcast and how it got started, and yeah.
I was listening to a lot of other theater podcasts. There are many great podcasts about theater that exist already. Specifically in Canada, I try to listen to as many Canadian podcasts as I can, as I live in Canada. And so I was just finding that a lot of them were focused on actors, which is great. No offense to them. But I found that my job as a stage manager just wasn't really very well represented. And anytime they did sort of talk to stage managers or people about stage management, it was always very brief. And I was like, man, there's so many people who have no idea what goes on and what goes into making a show, whether it's, an award show, a show on Broadway, a show at your community theater. Like, there's so many different moving parts that come together to make that happen. And I felt like all those people, including myself, were not being very well represented. And so I was like, man, I should start a podcast about that. And then I kind of hummed and hawed about it and then was like, wait, I have all the capabilities to do this. I can just do this myself. So I'm very grateful to my partner, Greg. He, like I said, owns an AV company here in Kamloops, BC, where we live. And so I literally said to him, I want to start a podcast. And he handed me all the things I needed. And I was like, oh, thank you. I don't know how it is for you, but I found, like, talking to some other people who have started podcasts, theater based or not, that a lot of the time the biggest expense or commitment to starting a podcast is the equipment that you need, whether it's something that you're going to buy or rent or borrow, when it's available. You decide you want to use one thing and then use it for 6 months and decide you want to move to something else. And so it was nice to sort of have that crossed off the list quite early.
Mm-hmm.
I was more worried about getting a logo made than I was about what microphones I was using, so that was really nice. But yeah, it's been, a work in progress. It's something I totally do for fun. It's not my job. I don't get paid for it. I do it just, for the sole purpose of letting other people know that there's so many other things that go into live performance than just actors. Again, no offense to actors, they're great. And we wouldn't have a job without them, but likewise, they wouldn't have a job without us. So
Mm-hmm.
I try to remind them of that whenever I can. No, but yeah, it's honestly just a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. I'm sure that's why you do it too, because you enjoy it, and you meet a lot of cool people. I've also found, and maybe you found this as well, that I have interviewed many people that I know, like people that I've known for a long time, that I've worked with a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and you find out so many different things about them through actually sitting down and interviewing them, as opposed to just being their friend or their coworker. So that part of it's really cool too. You just get to see different sides of people and get to connect with a lot of different artists, which is really awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so similar to how I started mine. I was watching the Tonys in 2018 or 17, and I was like, why are all of the backstage jobs during commercial? Why do they give out those
Yes,
awards during the
exactly.
commercials? Like, come on. And so I was like miffed about that. And so I was like, well, I want to highlight these people because it's great if the actors are on stage, but if you can't see them and you can't hear them, like,
Yeah, they would be nothing without us. No.
yeah.
Well, they would definitely be silent and probably naked and have no set and not know when to go on. So
Yeah. It would be cacophony.
yes, very much so.
I have really enjoyed, my first quite a few guests were my friends, and even today I interviewed several people who I've worked with before, but it is fun to have an intentional time, not just kind of like random conversation, but have like time set aside of like, okay, we're going to talk for an hour or whatever. And like how that doesn't happen often in our lives anymore, right? Everyone's so busy and we're all, a lot of times if you're eating with a group of people, some people are on their phones or whatnot, but it's really refreshing just to sit down and have a conversation, and that's all you're doing.
Yes, I totally agree. It doesn't happen very often anymore, so it's nice. I also think that some people really like to talk about themselves.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So it kind of gives them an outlet to talk about themselves more, and some people really really like that. So I'm
Yeah.
like I'm happy to facilitate that.
And even if you're talking to someone, like I'm a musician, and so some jobs just really don't have terrible much to do with what I do, but it inspires me. Like I leave almost. I don't think there's been one conversation where I haven't left thinking that was the best use of that hour. And then normally I go practice afterward because I'm so inspired by what I heard, even if it had nothing to do with from the music side of theater.
Yeah.
So take us through your background, where you're from, any like schooling you received, any training, and how you got to where you are now.
Okay. Well, like I said, I am from Canada. I live in a city called Kamloops, which most people have no idea where that is. But we like to describe it in terms of where Vancouver is, because many people know where Vancouver is, and anyone who doesn't know where Vancouver is, we go, do you remember when the Olympics were in Canada? And we're like, oh, yeah, I know that, okay. So it's about 3 hours northeast of Vancouver in like semi-arid desert. It's really hot here. It doesn't rain like it does in Vancouver. So we're kind of in the interior of British Columbia, which is amazing. I love BC. I've been to many provinces and it's my favorite. I might be biased, but yeah, I love it here. I mostly grew up here. I was born in Vancouver, but did my elementary, high school, and university all in Kamloops. And I have a Bachelor of Arts with a major in theater and performing arts and a minor in sociology. I'm also an equity stage manager, work in theater, a little bit in opera, a little bit of TYA, that kind of stuff, but mostly theater, musicals, straight plays, kind of anything, which is great. I sort of got into stage management, I guess kind of by accident in a way. I started in theater when I was in high school as an actor, as I know a lot of us do, especially stage managers. I auditioned for the play in grade 10. One of my friends was auditioning and was like, hey, we need an extra person for our group audition. They were doing like groups of 4 and she only had 3 people. She's like, do you want to come audition? And I was like, sure, whatever. So I went and auditioned. They were doing The Man Who Came to Dinner. There was only 3 female roles in the show, and I ended up with one of them. And I was like, why am I here? It was like very much by accident. But it ended up being a lot of fun, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I grew up dancing, and so I stopped dancing when I was like 9 or 10. And so it was a little bit like I had been on stage before. I kind of knew what that was about. But doing theater was so much different, and I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. So in grade 11 and grade 12, I did the spring productions. We did a show called Yearbook, the High School Musical, which is nothing like High School Musical. And I would highly recommend YouTubing it because I'm sure that there are versions on YouTube that will make you cringe. No offense to the people that wrote that show, but it is scary. And then our grade 12 year, we did Kiss Me Kate, which was really, really fun. And seeing the revival on Broadway was very cool. Just, we know all the songs and we understand the plot and all the stuff. So that was really fun. I got into university and I knew that I wanted to stick to theater in some way, shape, or form, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So in my first year of schooling, I took first year acting, and I took a whole slew of other classes: political science, philosophy, sociology, psychology. I knew I wanted to do arts. I mostly knew I did not want to do science, so I kind of narrowed it down from there. In my second year, I took second year acting, a couple of like theater elective courses, and realized that I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of more what I want to do. Still on stage at that point, but I got into my third year, was approached by our technical director in our program and was like, hey, TED Talks is coming to campus to do a showcase essentially of TED Talks within our city, like our school district kind of thing. And he was like, do you want to stage manage it? And I was like, I have no idea what that is, but that sounds cool. I'll do that. So he kind of ran me through like a brief, here's what's going to happen. Here's what you're in charge of. And I was like, cool. All right. So I did it, and it was really fun. And I was like, man, this is awesome. I get to be organized and I get to be bossy, which are 2 of my favorite characteristics. And from there on, I was like, maybe this is something that I want to do. I was very lucky that I was given the opportunity to do other shows, stage manage other shows while I was in university. I ASM'd a show that same year, and then the following year I SM'd and ASM'd in a showcase that we do. It's called Directors Festival. So the upper level senior students direct the lower level students in 1-act plays, and their all the tech stuff is done by the tech students of that year. So I got to do that, and then stage managed a couple more shows before I graduated, all of which sort of pointed me in the direction of, I can do this, I think. And that was solidified in, I think it was the end of my 4th year. I was approached by Daryl Cloran, who was the artistic director of Western Canada Theatre, which is the regional theatre here in Kamloops. He's now the artistic director of the Citadel Theatre in Edmonton. And Laurie Marchand, who was the former managing director of Western Canada Theatre, now the current managing director of the Indigenous theatre sector at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. They both came to me and said, hey, we're looking for an apprentice stage manager for next season. And we've heard from your professors that you're interested. It might be something that you want to do. And I had a friend of mine who I'm much closer with now, but at the time was not as close with. And she was the apprentice before me. And so her and I chatted a lot about it. And she thought it would be a really good fit for me and encouraged me to do it, and as did my professors at TRU at my university. And so after my what I call my half victory lap, I did a 4.5 year bachelor because I, theater, you sometimes only do 4 classes a semester instead of 5, and so I had 3 extra courses I had to take in the following, like my 5th year, the first half of my 5th year, I guess, which I ended up actually finishing early to go and do my first apprentice credit, which was Mary Poppins, which was incredibly overwhelming, but very much fun. And yeah, from there I did my equity apprenticeship. I'm not sure how it works in the States. I'm sure it's probably very similar. You do 8 credits as an equity apprentice at either at one theater, you do 6 credits at more than one theater. You can do up to 10 credits over your entire apprenticeship time in order to join the union as a full member. And so I did my 8 credits at Western Canada Theatre in Kamloops, and then became a full equity member, and have since just been working as a stage manager, as an ASM too. I love ASMing. And I've been very grateful to work in BC, Alberta, Ontario, different places. And I've really enjoyed traveling, getting to see new places, work with different teams, meet new people. That's like the best part of this job. I think anyone that works in live performance hopefully would say that, as long as they've met good people, that no matter where you go, you always meet like really, really awesome artists, or even people that work in the theaters that aren't necessarily artists themselves, but anyone like that. It's really great. So I'm very grateful. I've been very blessed to get where I am, for sure. Yeah, it's been a wild ride, but here we are. Now we're living in a pandemic and no one's doing theater, so
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've reached out to so many people to interview. A lot of people have not gotten back to me, like especially people I don't know, like, but now, like, since everything's shut down, all these people are like, "Yeah, I'll be on your podcast." And I'm like, "Oh, I have like 10 interviews now."
Yes, everyone now has time. They're like, "Oh, my
Yeah.
schedule has opened up."
Talk to us about the Canadian theater scene, because you're my first international interviews. So congratulations.
Oh, wow. I will be expecting my plaque in the mail. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
What are some of like the hot spots in the Canadian theater scene?
Oh man. Well, I guess it depends on who you talk to. And I also think it depends on if you're talking to actors or if you're talking to stage managers. But I will try to be as unbiased as possible, and I will kind of make it a blanket statement, I guess. In BC, so the West Coast, it's very much centered around the Lower Mainland. So Vancouver, definitely. They have some big theater companies, the Arts Club, Bard on the Beach, that do wonderful shows. They also have a host of sort of medium-sized theaters that do incredible art as well, that have wonderful artists. And then there's also a lot of non-equity work that goes on down in Vancouver, which is awesome for people that are, beefing up their resumes, that are coming out of school, that want to go into theater, but, aren't able to book a pro show right away. Vancouver is also really hot in the film and TV industry as well, which I'm sure a lot of people in the States know. A lot of really popular shows are filmed in and around Vancouver, and I've seen my fair share of Friends on TV. Yeah, so Vancouver is definitely, it's in BC, it's definitely the place to go. There's a couple of places on Vancouver Island that are also great. As you move sort of east across the country, definitely Edmonton, the Citadel Theatre, where Daryl Cloran is now, is really quite incredible. I've never been there. Edmonton is somewhere that I would love to work. I'd love to work with Daryl and his team there, and especially after knowing him and working with him here in Kamloops. But the Citadel does some really, really remarkable shows. They played host to the production of Hadestown, and a friend of mine actually did stage manage it while it was there, and she said it was, incredible to be able to have that opportunity to work on a show that's on its way to Broadway. They're doing it again with the Six and stuff, so it's just very diverse work that's being done there. They have a really great base of artists there. And then, of course, as you move sort of, again, farther east, Saskatchewan has a couple of great regional theaters, as does Manitoba. I can't really speak to the French theater scene in Canada because I am not bilingual. There is quite a large French theater scene, but I do not work in it because I can speak French, but it's not very good. So, but then as you move into Ontario, there's definitely some bigger hubs. The National Arts Centre in Ottawa, Of course, Toronto has so many different theaters of many, many sizes. Typically, that's where all of the Broadway shows end up. Either there, they'll have tour stops across Canada, but they'll definitely do a residency there. And I've also been lucky enough to work in some like smaller regional theaters in Ontario that I've really fallen in love with. Yeah, as you move sort of into the Maritimes, kind of above where you are, it's again, great regional theaters there too. I think, like I said, it really depends on who you are and where your home base is. I know that there are people in Ontario that live in Toronto that are like, oh, I really like, I cannot wait to work in Vancouver. And then there's people like me that live in BC that are like, oh my gosh, I only want to work in Toronto. So I think it really depends on who you are and sort of where you're headed. Both those things play a really big role. And of course, I'm sure this is the same in sort of the American theater scene, but it's all about who you know.
Mm-hmm.
It can play such a big role in it, and you just hope that you're making the right connections and I guess impressing the right people at the right time for sure.
Yeah, like it's a combination of like luck and being prepared for when that luck comes your way.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
So you mentioned you had a minor in sociology. How does that help you stage manage?
Oh, that's a good question. I never tell people I minor in sociology because people think it's weird, but I mean, it's definitely given me a lot of insight about people. Stage management is essentially you're less managing the stage and more managing everything that happens on stage, and that includes the people. So it can be sometimes you feel like you're your own like HR office trying to navigate situations on a daily basis, hourly basis sometimes. I think my minor has definitely helped me, I guess, just read people in a different way, make sure that I have more perspectives on a situation. It's opened me up definitely to like seeing more perspectives in especially negative situations or situations where I'm being asked to make a decision or based off of other people's reports or something that's happened. It's like a very dynamic job, and making sure that you're trying to be as understanding and open as possible is really important. And I think sociology has definitely opened me up to that. Ways that people work together in groups, ways to improve that when it's not good, ways to sort of document what's going right when it does happen and works well. All those kinds of things definitely play in. And, I try to take mental notes and use things later for sure.
When you're in situations where they're just like they're tense or people are angry or it's awkward, how do you kind of regulate yourself in those situations?
Well, I'm definitely one to try to stay positive whenever possible. I hope that people would say that about me, but I definitely feel that about myself, if that doesn't sound too prestigious to say. But I always sort of look at things as positively as possible. I think, like we were talking about listening to people, it's something that's, we take for granted very often. And in situations like that, where people feel like they're not being heard, things can escalate very quickly. So I always try to make sure I'm listening. As important it is for people to listen to me, I also need to listen to them. So I
Mhm.
always try to keep that in check. I try my best to sort of gauge where everyone is at without without prying too much. You want to make sure you have all the info that you need, but you also don't want to make people feel too vulnerable or make people feel too exposed in a situation where maybe they feel like they're the victim or something's happened where they feel uncomfortable or more than one person feels uncomfortable. I think you just have to try to be as supportive in all directions as you can, which can be very challenging. I've been in a couple situations where you try to be as positive as you can be, and sometimes it just doesn't work. There's always times where it fails, but I definitely try my best to just think about things openly, try to create a dialogue. Conversation is really important, listening is really important. And I say this about many things, but especially when you're in a situation where you're having to manage other people that may be disagreeing or there may be a conflict, is ask for help before you need it. If you're finding that you're in a situation where you're like, this is getting a little bit much, it's a bit over my head, or I can see this may be going over my head, I always try to involve either a supervisor, a production stage manager, maybe an administrator from the theater that I'm working at, someone that I trust to go to that I know can sort of help diffuse a situation or look at it in a different light and, make sure that everyone's calm. There's like a few people that come to mind just as I'm saying this, different theaters I work at, who I would go to and who I have gone to in the past. But I think it's really important to not take on too much in that same sense. Like I said, if you need help, ask for it. Don't be ashamed to do so because it can sometimes get you into trouble if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, theater is such a collaboration, and so yeah, I like that perspective a lot. Of like, okay, if it's collaborative on the art side of things, it can also be collaborative on like the problem solving and the conflict side of things.
Yes, exactly.
You also mentioned that you loved ASMing. What do you talk to us about assistant stage managing and some of the things that you like about doing that job?
Oh my gosh. I think sometimes I prefer ASMing to SMing, but I say that because like I'll have just ASM to show and I'll be like, I love being the ASM. And then I'll SM a show and be like, I love being the SM. So it kind of depends on how I'm feeling. But yeah, ASMing is, I think it's sort of where my heart lies. No offense to stage managers, but ASMs are a bomb. We do a lot of cool stuff. And ASMing I just find is a bit more of the puzzle, like solving the puzzle of what has to happen on a show. The stage manager definitely does that, but it's a bit more solo in a way. Like of course you work with different people, while you're on headset, you work with designers and you work with the ASMs too. But I find, when you're backstage as the ASM, there's so many problems you have to solve. You're using an apprentice if you have them, you're, using crew members, you have actors who also need to do things too. And I just find like putting that puzzle together uses parts of my brain that I love using. And I find I don't necessarily get to use those same parts of my brain when I SM. And it just makes me very happy. I love the relationship that you build with the company when you ASM, I find is very different than when you SM. There's only been like maybe 2 or 3 shows where I felt like as the SM, I have built like a very strong rapport with the cast in the same way that I would if I were the ASM on that same show. And I find just because the ASM is, in the thick of it with them backstage trying to solve the problems and make things happen. And a lot of the times, I think this kind of, I don't know, I didn't really think about this until I was put in a situation in the past sort of year that, the ASM ultimately is the one that has to deal with things when it goes to shit on stage. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the SM can do what they can for sure. Like, if it's a lighting thing, they can fix it. If it's a sound thing, they can fix it. A lot of the time, you as the ASM are being the messenger of what the SM is trying to accomplish. And so you're having to sort of navigate making sure that you're receiving the SM's message and being like, okay, yes, we can execute this, and then also putting that into action as opposed to the SM doing it themselves because they're up in the booth doing other things, making sure the show is happening still. But they're like, we need to put this door back on its door frame. Why did it come out? Like, things like that. She's like, the SM is like, we need to fix this. And I'm like, okay, yes, we will fix it. Let me figure out how. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think there's a lot of things about ASMing that I love. Presetting, running the show, finding the little moments that are fun that you can kind of like have fun with every night. Yeah, it's great. Like I said, I love SMing too, but ASMing I think is secretly where my heart lies.
How do you get better at your job? Like, how do you grow? Are there specific books or, like Instagram accounts or Facebook groups or resources, blogs that you go to grow? Or, how do you continuously try to get better at what you do?
Well, I think the nature of our job, just because it's so ever changing and every show, every scene in every show presents a different challenge that you have to overcome. You ultimately are learning, even if you don't think you're learning on every show that you do.
Hmm.
There is a Facebook group. It's called Canadian Stage Managers, and it literally is what it is titled. It's a group of Canadian stage managers, and it's a great resource for many things. Lately, it's been how to navigate this whole COVID-19 situation, but previous to about 2 weeks ago, a lot of it is, hey, I'm looking for this clause in the CTA, the Canadian Theatre Agreement that we use in our union, you know, or I'm misinterpreting this clause. Has anyone else ever used this? to, I have to make fake blood. What have people used? I have to, make wine that spills but can't stain. What have you used? Like that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is very helpful. And I've ended up, using that group many times for different things, and even reaching out to specific people in that group for different things that maybe they've spoken about in the past, that you're like, oh, I'm just going to send this person a quick DM or a quick message and ask them about this thing that they maybe posted about 6, 12, 18 months ago. And everyone's just always very open to help, which is great. But I would say for sure, like, just the different shows you work on, every show brings a different problem, and you have to learn how to solve it. And sometimes you solve it with something that you're like, okay, that was okay, I'll give it a 5 out of 10, and we'll try to improve it. Other times you're like, wow, I just figured something out that's like super great, and I'm going to continue to use this. I find that with paperwork a lot. You're always perfecting paperwork as you go. you you make a template and you use it for a show and go, okay, well, that went okay, but maybe next time I make this, I'm going to format it differently or do something different. You always try to sort of improve upon it. And I think just being in it, like utilizing things like that, and trying to solve problems makes you better in the long run. So I think that's sort of the biggest source of learning or education that I get as a stage manager, working with different people, learning different people's ways of doing things. Even in the past year, I worked with a bunch of completely different ASMs and SMs depending on what my position was, and you learn stuff from them all the time. And I think that's really important to not knock what other people are doing and be like, oh, that's not the way I do it. Some things I do that, but for the most part, I'm like, oh, wow, that's really cool that you do this in a different way than I do. Maybe I, A, like this thing better than the thing I use, B, can, mold this thing into a sort of hybrid of what I already am doing and what you're doing, or C, you don't like it at all, and that's fine. But yeah, I think in that way, for sure, you're always kind of building upon your skills, and taking things away from contracts and using them in the future.
Mm-hmm. It's such a weird thing. Like, sometimes you're doing the same show over and over and over and over. And yeah, sometimes it gets a little old, or you're like, oh, I don't really want to play the show again. But there's something about it that never gets stale. I don't know if it's because of the audience, or just like the magic of all of these groups of artists coming together to create a show. But I think there's something about theater that lends itself to growth, if you know what I mean.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially when you get the chance to work on a show that runs for a long time, the show that you did on opening night is very different than the show you did on closing. Hopefully for the better. I think it gives you time to iron out the wrinkles and perfect things. I recently had an experience where I did a show back in Ontario last fall, from like the end of August till the end of October. And we ran for like 3.5 weeks there, and then closed the show. Everyone went their separate ways, and we remounted it here in Kamloops at the beginning of January. And for some people, they're like, oh my gosh, we're not going to visit the show for 3 months. Like, how am I going to remember what I did, what I said, the intention behind things, the feelings that I had? Of course, that's always in the back of my mind as a stage manager. Like, I'm less worried about the back end of things. The ASM that I had came with us, and I was like, you rock. Let's, like, I'm not worried about the backstage. Most of the tech was the same. We had the designers joining us again, so I was like not worried about me very much. Well, I'm always a little bit worried about me, but pretty much not worried about me. It was so interesting hearing the actors on the first day. They were like, ooh, I can't wait to see what we remember. But so many things had sort of been ruminating inside of them for 3 months. And there were so many moments that were just so much cleaner, or, so much more thoughtful, more precise. And, the director had said, like, this is what I was trying to achieve the last time we did this. But, we only had 2 weeks of rehearsal before we went into tech, and you just don't always have that time. And it's almost like having the break in between, letting all of that sort of settle and then bringing it to the surface again. It really like can change it for the better. I would say for the most part, I can't really think of a moment that was changed for the worse. But that's really interesting, especially as the stage manager, to watch the moments sort of move and be so fluid from 3 months ago to now. It was like, wow, like this is such a change. Like, especially you hear the director's side, and sometimes I find I know what the director means, and the actor might not be interpreting what the director is saying in the same way that the director means it, or that I'm interpreting it. And there's so many moments that, clicked, that I was like, oh yes, like he's going to be so happy about that because that's what he wanted 3 months ago. But sometimes all you need is a little bit of time to sort of, digest it, even like block it out of your brain subconsciously and then bring it back. It's an interesting part of my job for sure that I very much enjoy.
Mm-hmm. How do you balance life? How do you balance rest and time with friends and family and work?
Oh, how do any of us do that?
That's why
No,
I'm asking. I don't know
yeah,
either.
exactly. No, I think that's a really great question, and I try to be more aware of that the older I get. not that I'm super old, but it's something that I wish I learned when I was younger, for sure. I think self-care and like the work-life balance aspect of this job can be really overtaking sometimes. Especially as stage managers, we're the first ones there, we're the last ones to leave. My rehearsal day, if we're rehearsing 10 to 6, I roll in at, just after 9, and sometimes I'm not gone till 7, and have to get home and make dinner and also maybe do laundry and walk the dog, and The Bachelor's on, so you have to watch that, and like also trying to get to bed on time and pack your lunch for the next day so that your morning is easy when you wake up. And it can be really overwhelming. It sounds a bit weird, but I've tried to sort of step back from looking at it as a big picture. I try to not look at how I'm going to balance my work and my life for the next 6 weeks, because I think that can be sort of quite daunting. So I try to sort of compartmentalize parts of it and work at it piece by piece, sort of day by day. I definitely prioritize rest, something that as like I said, get older, it's something that I find more important. Definitely a morning person, so I love getting up early. If I can wake up 45 minutes early and like kill some chores in the morning that I don't need to do after work, that's great. I'm very into that. That's why I find transitioning from rehearsal to tech to running the show so difficult, because then I have to go to bed at midnight and I'm like, what is happening? To force myself to sleep in so that I can still get enough rest, but it's really hard. I also try to leave my work at work, which is something that I encourage everyone to do no matter what your job is, but I find especially in theater, it can be really challenging. You have to sort of really make it a priority. If I have emails to send, I do them before I leave the rehearsal hall or before I leave the theater at the end of the show. Started doing this back, it was like 2018, I started doing this and I haven't stopped, where I actually have taken the push notifications off my email on my phone. So I don't know when I get an email. I literally have to choose to go and check my email. And that has really helped me stay away from my work email when I'm at home.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like it may make a conscious choice to go and check your emails. So I'd highly recommend doing that for anybody who is looking to sort of cut down on the amount of work that bleeds into their home life. It really made it quite a difference for me. But yeah, I would rather stay an extra 20 minutes at the theater and get the stuff done that I need to do and then go home and not have to think about it than leave, either take the work home with me, and what could be 20 minutes of work then takes me 40 minutes because I'm, at home, the dog's there, people are talking to you, you're just like in your own space. So I try to really separate that and leave my work at work. I find that's very helpful. I also try to do like meal prep for the week as much as I can. I always try to incorporate some things that I love, which sounds weird, but I was doing The Sound of Music before Christmas, and there was always a portion of the show where everyone was on stage, and it was like this one moment that I could go get a Girl Guide cookie, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love, which is like Girl Scouts in the U.S., but the Girl Guide cookie was something I look forward to, so I made sure I had Girl Guide cookies so that I could go and have that Girl Guide cookie and make it through the rest of the show. Like, it sounds so weird, but it's like those little things that sort of are like, oh yeah, this is great, I love this. Which sounds very sad. And the people who worked on that show who may listen to this podcast will be like, yes, the Girl Guide cookie was very important. But and then yeah, as far as friends, I mean, I'm very lucky that my partner Greg sort of understands my theater world. I don't think I could ever be with someone who A, is an actor or like directly involved in theater, or B, is not involved in live performance at all. Like Greg is very much in the middle. and he understands what Tech Week is. Like he, we just recently moved, but I used to live very close to the theater, the show venue that we use here at Western Canada Theatre in Kamloops. And so I would walk home for dinner. And, he was always very good at, if you had already left to go back to work or something, he would leave me dinner, or he would have dinner ready for me, like that kind of stuff. He understands that, like, it's crazy during Tech Week. And when our friends call and are like, hey, do you guys want to go for dinner? It's like, no, Maddie's working. She can't go for dinner kind of thing. He's very good at that, and I'm super grateful to him for everything that he does to make my life easier. And then as far as friends go, I'm again very grateful to have actually just a couple of people that I work with that I consider friends outside of theater. A lot of my friends, this is going to sound very weird, but my core group of friends that I have had we've been friends for since we were 13 or 14. None of them are in theater. We're all actually in completely different occupations. I work in theater. One's a nurse. One's a social worker. One works at with the government. One is currently doing her master's in London. We're all very different, and I think having people that are not within your work circle that you can spend time with and talk to is super important. The one thing I love is that they always ask me how work's going, like, oh, how's the show? And all they need is like, yeah, it's going well. And they're like, okay, cool, moving on. They don't need to rip it apart. They don't want to know all the dirty details. They don't need me to reenact the situation that happened. They care that I'm doing well and that I'm enjoying my job. And they're just like, all right, let's move on and talk about something that's not work. And I'm like, oh, thank you. It's very relieving. But yeah, I think definitely just making sure you have different outlets, whether that's people, whether that's, a hobby that you do that's not involved with work. I also love working out. I love going to the gym, doing CrossFit, stuff like that. That's really fun. I love getting outside and hiking and walking and biking and stuff like that. Just gives you a hot second to not think about work. Work is important and I love it so much, but I don't think I would love it as much as I do if I didn't have time away from it.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I balance. It's such a weird thing because I don't know about you, but at least for me, I find a good balance in my life, and then a worldwide pandemic happens, or I find
Oh,
balance in
yes.
I find balance in my life, and then you break up with someone, or you move, or
Mm-hmm.
your job your day job changes. It seems like balance is always you always have to work at it. It never happens you find it, but it's not stable.
Yeah, it's balance, for a minute.
Yeah.
Ever changing balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something you have to intentionally fight for.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have a favorite part of the rehearsal process of getting, taking a show, seeing it, hearing about it for the first time, looking at the script to opening night?
On musicals, my favorite part is when the musicians and the actors finally get to actually work together. For those that maybe don't know, a lot of the time the music director is in the room during rehearsal. Maybe special circumstances you might have more than one musician, but most of the time it's just a music director, and they are teaching all of the music, off a keyboard with the company, solos, duets, all that kind of stuff, full company numbers. And typically, as you get closer to the end of the rehearsal process and closer to tech, the musicians will start coming in after hours or maybe at a different venue and working with the musical director on the actual instrumentation of the show. And typically, just before tech, you'll do a sitz probe or a Vondel probe, depending on the show, where the musicians, the music director, and the actors all finally get to sing all the songs in one place. The actors are singing the words with the actual music as opposed to them singing with just the keyboard, and the musicians are being able to play along with the actual person singing the actual lyrics as opposed to the music director just singing. And I love being privy to that moment because it's so magical.
Mm-hmm.
You get really used to hearing a song with just a keyboard, and then all of a sudden you hear it with even if there's 6 musicians who are all playing 5 different instruments each, it's so incredible to make have that moment happen in front of you where the actors oh my gosh, this is so cool, and the music directors most of the time hopefully happy with how everything's going and how it all sounds. And yeah, that's one of my favorite moments. And I think overall, no matter what kind of theater I do, I love the first round of applause that a company gets, whether it's invited dress rehearsal or a preview, maybe even just a round of applause in the rehearsal hall where you're doing a run of the show, a stumble through, and they've invited, the office admin staff or whatever down. I don't know. It's like, it sounds a bit vain, I guess, to talk about applause, but I always think it's like from backstage, it's like clarification that, everyone has done their jobs. Of course, the actors have done what everybody sees, but I feel like applause applies to everybody, including people that you don't see on stage. And I'm always very grateful for the applause that the actors receive, because it means that I've done my job right, so the actors can do their job right in order to gain that applause, I guess. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. I also love the Zitz probe. As a musician, usually the Zitz probe rehearsal, we're usually not like 100% ready. So it's kind of rough, but everyone loves it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. You restart a song 5 times, and then people are in different keys, and you're like, oh, sorry. But like, it's still amazing.
Yeah. It's so positive. The atmosphere of Zitz probe is so positive, and everyone's in it together, and it's just, yeah, it's magical.
Yeah, it truly is. It is magical.
Awesome. So I have one last question. I like to end with an advice question, because I love getting advice, and there's so much advice I wish I would have gotten when I was like a young musician. And so, so advice to young stage managers who are just, have maybe like in their last few years of school, or just, in their first few years of their professional career. What advice would you give young stage managers?
I would definitely say love what you do. As I get older, I meet so many people that work in theater or not who have jobs that they don't love. And I'm like, why are you going to a job every day that you don't love? Like, I would not want to do that. I'm very lucky that I found something that I was super passionate about, that I'm able to do, that, again, I don't do it all year round, but I am able to do it, and it's fulfilling for me, and I love it. My advice to younger people just getting into it is like, make sure that you love it. Don't stick with it because you feel like you have to. These days you can decide that 3 years into something that you're like, not my vibe anymore, I'm going to do something different, and like, that's okay. I would hate to see someone that, decides to commit to something because they feel like they have to, or somebody told them to, and it's not actually what they want to be doing, because that ultimately ends up being negative to other people that you work with if you don't enjoy what you're doing, and that can really affect others in a way that I guess some people don't fully get. But I think it's just really important to be rooted in what you do and be doing it for a purpose, and yeah, don't just do it because you feel like it's something that you saw written in a textbook that might be good for you to try, and then you're like, oh well, I'm kind of just gonna stick with this now. Like, love it. Do it because you love it.
Yeah, this career is too challenging to not love it, because sometimes like the love of what you do is like the only thing getting you through the really hard not being employed, or having a very sad looking bank account. Like you're gonna need a lot of love sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you have to, it's all sort of a cycle, you have to work for it, and you have to be okay with, like you said, not working, and, dealing with what you're going to do in between contracts, or, things are going to happen, and things are going to be pulled out from underneath you, and you just have to sort of roll with it. And I think enjoying what you're doing allows you to handle those situations in a more positive way. Because, yeah, if you don't love it, then everything is like a big storm cloud on top of your job, and that's not very fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Maddie, for taking the time to do this.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so, honestly, just so privileged to be your first international interview.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.